Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our January Next Partner webinar. We are thrilled to have everybody today to discuss 3 truth-seeking questions every founder should ask customers and prospects. My name is Lisa Friedlander. I'm the CRO over here at Next, powered by Schulman Rogers. Next, it is an award-winning legal platform for startups and emerging growth companies. And our monthly webinars are just one of many things we do to help contribute to the ecosystem, de-risk our clients and founders, and provide lots of valuable educational materials and resources. So today is a really, really important topic, right? Because if you don't have sales, you don't have anything. And there's some quotes and information that Bob is going to go over, but this one I love the most. Successful companies first fall in love with the customer's problem, not their own solution. And it's really true. Startups need to ask about and understand customers' real-world priorities and challenges before they launch into their pitch and value prop. And we don't always do that. We tend to talk about ourselves before we talk about the customer's problem. So we have the expert, the legendary and my good friend, Bob London, here with us today. Bob teaches companies how to have strategic and revealing customer conversations. Over the course of conducting nearly 3,000 customer discovery conversations with B2B decision makers, Bob has developed a series of bold and disruptive questions, probably patented or trademarked maybe, called Radically Authentic Discovery, that get customers and prospects to open up about what's most important to them. Bob has been named in both 2022 and 2023 as a top 25 customer success influencer by Success Coaching, and he's an entrepreneur in residence at University of Maryland's Dingman Center. Folks, if you don't mind putting yourselves on mute, do that there. Sorry for the interruption. So it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Bob. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, raise your hand. Bob loves to have an interactive and informal conversation, so feel free to interrupt. We'll also reserve some time at the end for questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And just a shout out to Lisa for doing so much to promote not only the community, the early stage community, but specifically this, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is Next is an example of, which means they are doing, they listened to the market. They understood what customers' issues, I call it the elevator rant. You know, what were customers bitching and moaning about after they met with their law firm? And there's like, oh, the cost and the unpredictability and the fees. And so packaged legal services from expert attorneys is that's how I describe Next. Predictable pricing and, you know, all that is an example of listening to the market. So shout out to Terry. Haven't talked to you in a while. Nice to see you. I am going to keep it conversational. So if you ask me, would I rather talk to a group of 1,200, you know, online to this sort of big audience, or this, I'd rather do this because it's more intimate and it is a conversation. We can make it a conversation. It's hard to do that with, hey, George, with 1,200 people. In fact, it's impossible. So I am going to talk about this topic, and I'm going to dive in, like I'm going to go right to the center of the content and then pull back. So I'm not going to talk about me yet. That would kind of be the opposite of the point here. Is talking about me is not the point. I want to get you the content. So quick story on a personal level. I have 2 sons. This is a picture of them when they were cute, and they thought I walked on water, and they never argued, and they didn't have opinions. So I'm going to tell you a story though from a few years after this, like middle school, high school, when they become surly and monosyllabic and grumpy. And I've been working in a home office for almost 2 decades, and so I've had the privilege of being home when the kids come home from school and sitting with them while they're having their snack or whatever. And so I had read, of course, the parenting handbook, which said, engage in your kids' education, ask them what they're learning. So I took that literally. And one day, again, high school, middle school, so what'd you guys learn at school today? And they looked up at me from their snack, their like Lucky Charms or whatever. And they looked at each other and they just kind of rolled their eyes and went back to eating. And finally, so I asked that every day. And one day, one of them, the older one, I think, said, Dad, we're just trying to decompress. And I thought to myself, well, that's a win because decompress is a pretty good vocabulary word. So that's good. I'm getting something. But so I'm nothing if not resilient and resourceful. So that was, let's just call that week one of school didn't go well on this score, asking the textbook question. What about week two? What am I going to do? So I decided to ask this question. Did anything funny or annoying happen today? I didn't mention the word school at all. And the one on the left, they looked at each other like I was trying to pull something on them. And the one on the left, they were thinking about it though. And the one on the left said, yeah, I'll tell you something funny. In science today, Lucas, and I'm already thinking this is going to be funny because Lucas turned out to be 6'4", 320-pound football player in college. So he's just bigger than life. In science today, Lucas passed gas really loud. And now he didn't use the words pass gas. So I asked an authentic question. I got a very authentic answer. So I gave an authentic response and I laughed. I laughed a lot, probably. I could imagine it. I could imagine it happening. And so while that's happening, the older one, who was taking, let's just say he was taking algebra at the time, said, yeah, something annoying did happen today. Josh, my friend Josh almost knocked me down trying to get to the whiteboard to show his work on quadratic equations. So I knew this kid Josh was a little bit of a show off. It was kind of all about him. So I got it. It's like, yeah, I understand. That must have been annoying. Meanwhile, the younger one looks at the older one and says the magic words that I'll never forget. What are quadratic equations? Which prompted the older one to give his best explanation of quadratic equation. I have no idea if he was right or not. I never really understood algebra, to be honest with you. Then it turns out I never needed to. So, but the dynamic here, and depending on how it goes here, feel free to put in the chat. When I ask a question, it's sometimes you could think it's rhetorical, but feel free to answer it. So an example of a question that I would pose to you is, what did you notice about those two questions and scenarios? Why did the second one get them to engage? Why did the second one get them to engage? Anybody? And at least I'm going to exclude you from this and just get our audience to weigh in on the chat. And you don't have to answer on the chat because I'm going to keep talking and I'll talk about it. So this is a great example of the real world with customers and prospects. When you ask about you, when you ask a leading question, they both knew that the reason I was asking, what did you learn in school today, was because I'm an anxious parent who wants to know, make sure they're learning and keep track of what they're learning and all that. And it was really a question for me, not them. The second question spoke directly to what was going on in their real world every day. Two teenage boys, funny and annoying things happen all the time. So I got lucky. Greg said it's an open-ended question and the one that empathizes with what they're experiencing. Yes. When you ask questions on the other person's terms, not yours, that's the key. That's the key. Now, why am I telling this story, though? This is supposed to be about customers and serious stuff and questions. Well, because we do the same thing with our customers and prospects. We ask questions like, what keeps you up at night? Nothing inherently wrong with the question, except that it's been asked approximately 75 million times in B2B sales conversations and quarterly business reviews. So the intent of the question, usually that the customer understands because they've been asked it so many times, what keeps you up at night? They know that as soon as they answer, you're going to pivot back to how you can sell them something or solve something. And that is not an effective way to engage. Their most likely response is to say something cliche as well. Like you ask a cliche question, they give a cliche response. We have to do more with less this year, which is not an insight. It's almost a platitude these days. Everyone has to do more with less. And so you're basically feeding into the customer's thought pattern, which is that their expectation is you're going to act and talk like a vendor. You're going to pivot quickly about your product. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong about that, except that it's not working as well as it used to because customers need, as Lisa so aptly pointed out in the beginning, you have to understand their problem before you can help them or sell them anything. And I'll give you another quote to match Lisa's, which is, it's a movie quote. And the quote is someone saying, well, that's enough about me. Let me ask about you. What do you think of me? And that's kind of the perception that a lot of customers have. And I've done so many customer discovery conversations, as Lisa pointed out, that I do hear this a lot is, I kind of, as a customer, I kind of I know there's going to be a level of BS at the beginning of the conversation. So I wait for that to conclude and I patiently try to wait. Hopefully it won't go on too long, not too many slides. And then, hopefully they'll ask me about the problem and I'm happy to talk about it. So that's what I hear a lot. So what I'm going to do now is, as I said, I'm going to dive way into the core of my methodology, and I'm going to give you a live customer giving an answer in this recording of one of my questions. Okay. And this is one of the just truth-seeking questions that I promised to deliver today. In fact, I think you're going to get more than 3. So I want to just set the stage. This is me interviewing my client's customer. So if I'm hired to do a customer listening tour or training by a tech company, so I'll go out and talk to their customers, or if I'm doing training for them, I will do a sample interview with one of their customers to show them how it works. So this is one of the questions that I asked this particular company. It might help a little bit to know that my client is a software platform that provides help desk support to online brands, consumer brands. So, not B2B, but their customer is obviously a business. He is the VP of customer success for an online jewelry brand. It's actually a quite prominent online jewelry brand. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. You don't need to sort of understand everything about this. And what I want you to do again in the chat, I want you to listen. And in the chat, just put anything that you hear. And it's not a test. There's no right or wrong. What did you hear? What did you observe about the conversation? And what did you hear the person saying? Just play it back for us in the chat if you can. Thanks. So I'm going to play this, and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to go up to kind of the 30 or even 50,000 foot level for a moment. So if I could sneak into a board meeting there or the senior leadership meeting, what do you think is the biggest priority or challenge that's being discussed at the board level for the next 6 months to a year?
I think the biggest challenge that would be discussed during board meetings would be, so I think you might be aware over the last year or two, Apple made some serious changes to their privacy laws with the iOS 14 update, I believe it was. And that has had a massive impact on digital marketers and customer acquisition. The cost of customer acquisition is much higher. It's harder to track, what customers are looking at from a data and privacy and cookie standpoint. And with that, it's been a big challenge for us. And I think a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, because it just makes it that much more difficult and expensive to acquire new customers. And I know that's been a large point of emphasis, not only in recent times, but dating back to last year is, hey, how do we as a brand that has had great success using the social media model in terms of like ad spend and acquiring customers to that method, how do we pivot and how do we adjust to acquiring these new customers, given that, with that privacy change, things really flipped upside down and has made it a lot more difficult and expensive for brands like ours to acquire these new customers. So I could almost tell you with certainty, if you were to be in a board meeting, that would be something that is discussed is, hey, how do we overcome this challenge and identify new ways to, acquire customers and just be a healthy business?
So there was Greg weighed in with a whopper of a comment. You framed the question and asked permission from the customer to go deeper. All right, so I'm already going to anoint Greg an honorary chief listening officer here. He's very good at observing this stuff. You challenge the customer about knowledge of their internal business, which gets them to open up and prove why they're there. You basically nailed the framework of gap selling. And you let him talk, no interruptions, marvelous exchange. Here's the thank you. That is good. And I know gap selling, and I think that I've had folks who've hired me after they used gap selling as a complement to it because of some of the things you'll hear today. Not a pitch, just an explanation. So first thing I'll point out that you should observe is that I don't know if you saw me hovering over the timer on the clip. The guy talked quite a bit, he did. He's pretty open, but this is typical of the conversations that you'll have when you use this approach. This is not the most extremely open customer I've ever talked to, nor is he the most extremely strategic. Like, he obviously had an idea of what was going on in the board meetings, which is even though he's not in the board meetings. So it was a minute 50 or something, and the question took 10 seconds to ask. So there's a lot of leverage when you ask a what I call a disruptive question, which I'll go into some more examples later. Now, let me talk about this question and the wording of it specifically. And I'm going to give you a little insight into how it works and why it works. So the way I asked it was a little different than this. The question was, hey, if I could sneak into your board meeting or your executive leadership meeting, what's the biggest topic? The biggest topic I'd hear them talking about, or challenge, or priority. The reason I ask that first and teach people to ask it first is two reasons. First, it is very disarming for you to come in to a prospect or customer, and the first thing out of your mouth is not about you. It's not a leading question to get them to talk about the problem you solve. It's nothing like that. It's very disarming. It builds trust, which leads to more candor and transparency. That's why my approach is called radically authentic discovery. It's just a more authentic conversation for both of you. So it disarms them. That way, when you get later in the conversation and you do want to sort of align the value of what you're selling or what you're providing to an existing customer with one of their big priorities, they'll give you more candid feedback because they see that you're setting the tone. You are modeling the behavior that you want from them. Transparency, candor. You're willing to ask the question about them, and that's where you want to start. The other reason I use this question at the very beginning of discovery conversations and teach people to use it early is because every great company in the history of the world, every successful company, does a great job of aligning the value of whatever they sell with something important to the business, not just the person they're talking to. So you have to understand what their company is trying to accomplish. Trying to grow, great. How are you trying to grow? What's the big new initiative? We're struggling in this example. We're struggling with a change in the ecosystem that we couldn't control. It was a surprise. Apple changed how they allow users to be tracked. And great. Well, is there something you're doing about that? Is that a big deal? How important is that? Does your solution align with one of those two things? Maybe, maybe not. In this example, with my client providing a help desk platform to help these guys do customer-facing support, absolutely, it was a big deal that Apple made those changes because this company that you heard from, their customer acquisition cost was going through the roof, and it was hurting their financials overall. So it was a board level issue. I'll just tell you too that the interesting thing was when I presented this recording, which was a series of clips like this from the same interview, to my client in New York, to a bunch of, there may be 25 customer success people in the room. And I said to them, so you guys know what he's talking about, right? The Apple privacy changes. A lot of blank stares. These were not old people. These were digital natives, all of them, probably the average age of under 30. I said, well, Apple changed how, yeah. Someone say something? Someone have a question? So I said, how Apple has changed the way they allow they've given users more permission and control over how they're tracked. And they said, no, more blank stares. So finally I said, how when you open an app for the first time after it's updated, or you get a new app, it says, allow app to track across other applications, yes or no. And you probably say no. Oh, they all went, oh yeah, okay. So the group I was speaking with, even though this was an issue that affected every single one of their e-commerce customers, hundreds of customers, they didn't know about something fundamental and sweeping that was happening in their market. And I didn't scold them. It's not my job to scold them, but what I recommended and what ended up happening was they brought in one of their customers. I don't know if it was this one or a different one, for sort of an insider brown bag session to say, like, here's everything you need to know about this Apple thing because it's affecting all of your customers. So the tutorial aspect of that was important for my client. I couldn't give it to them. I'm not an expert in that stuff. So this was very important on a number of levels. Now you'll notice that it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell more to this person, but everything that we're talking about is in the process of building transparency by engaging on their terms, getting them to open up more, at which point good things happen, whether it's selling or retaining customers. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go through this, but I want to now take us a little bit of a step back. So yeah, so I've worked with a bunch of companies, and I love speaking and talking. This is my labor of love, is this customer discovery thing. I'm a former marketing guy. I still do some strategic marketing engagements, but basically as a marketing strategy consultant. One day I was talking to a founder and I said, who are your customers? Why do they buy? Why do they sometimes not buy? Why do they stay or leave? And as we were speaking, I could see that his answers were not confident. He didn't seem confident. And I said, it's kind of ridiculous to talk about marketing spending before we understand those things. So why don't I go do a customer listening tour for you? And because he was creative and curious and enterprising, he said yes. And he paid me to do it. And that was 2,700 conversations ago. So it turns out I love doing this work. It has been very rewarding to teach teams my methodology, which is something that came up about 3 years ago. And I'm happy to explain more about that at some point. So this is the work I love to talk about, which is also, again, why I love small groups, because we can chat and I can address challenges, questions. So the message I have for you, as I assume you're all vendors of some sort selling something, what I hear and what I read in the research is you're not listening. You're simply not listening. Now, that's not me telling you individually that you're not listening now. I hope you are. But what the research says that buyers on the B2B side say that discovery and listening are two of the top 3 purchase influences out of 15. I'll say it again. Discovery and listening are 2 of the top 3 reasons that they end up buying out of 15 reasons, according to the survey by the Rain Group. If you ask buyers, well, how are vendors doing on those 2 things, listening, discovery? We suck. And I'm a vendor. We suck. We're not good at it, according to buyers. I don't care what other people say on LinkedIn. I go to the buyer and I say, what do you think? How are we doing? So in other words, everyone can have an opinion, but this is actual research. Then there's a company called Gong, which has a platform that analyzes recorded sales and customer success conversations. They studied 1 million calls, and they found that the top performing B2B reps talk less than half the time versus the bottom performers who talk almost 3/4 of the time. And we can probably have a long conversation about why that is. And when you're new, you talk more because you're nervous, you're not a subject matter expert, et cetera. We can talk about all that. But the main issue is that scientifically, our brains can hear 4 times as many words per minute as people can speak. We can hear 4 times faster than people talk. So that means that our brain has a lot of extra cycles to think about what the person said, start to formulate a response, get defensive, formulate a solution, figure out something new to sell them before that other person has really told their whole story. And so we have to figure out a way and ways to slow down our brains. And that's one of the things that I teach and I love to talk about. By the way, I'm not known as a good listener inside the walls of my house. It's a big joke. Like, oh, you teach what now to people, to businesses, listening? Good. How's that going? So, but I've made it a little bit of a study professionally. So the method, this is a glimpse into the methodology. So I'm going to give you 3 tips. First 3 tips for how to listen better. And then we're going to weave it into the truth-seeking questions. I call it STFU or $TFU, which is silence till you fully understand. Number 1, understand the customer's big picture. Ask them about what they're experts in, which is their business and their job. When they open up, it's because they're talking about things they're comfortable with. When we try to pull information out of them about us, what do you think of this solution? What, leading questions towards us. They're not experts in our product. They never want to be, nor should you want them to be. So when you ask about what they're experts in, which is what are they responsible for, and how does that fit into the company's global priorities and challenges? global meaning big, not necessarily worldwide. What will your solution help their company do better? So it's not just buying your solution and closing the deal. What outcomes are they expecting? How does it fit into the person's job? And how does their job fit into the company? It's like opening the aperture is what I call it. Second, in the conversation, support what they're saying. Don't keep shifting. So we all have probably someone we know who, as soon as you say something, they trump you. If I say, oh yeah, my son just got a job, they say, oh yeah, well, my son's starting at a hedge fund making $2 million a year next week. Now this is someone, I'm thinking of someone in particular who he didn't say that, but that's his thing. It's just his thing. We've known each other since college. It's fine. That's how it is. But in business, if you constantly shift to your point of view, when the person's finished talking, they lose trust and they stop engaging. Dig into what they want to talk about more. And there are techniques you can use to do that with second level good questions, which we'll talk about. Second level clarifying questions. What did you mean when you said that? How is that important to your company? Those kinds of questions. That's support, don't shift. And embrace the silence, which is something that many of us, I know I have problems with. When you hear silence and you're the vendor, you feel a responsibility. You're a service provider or a solutions provider or a product company. You feel like you're leading the conversation. You need to say something. It's too quiet. The reality is a lot of times customers are thinking, and if you jump in too quickly, again, they kind of lose steam in the conversation or trust. Let them talk and don't jump in. My favorite tool for this, we all have it. It's right on our keyboard. It's the mute button. If you mute yourself after you ask a question, which I do all the time. Today I can't because I'm on a roll. It's a one-to-many situation. It's not a one-on-one. Ask a really good question, go on mute. And that way it becomes a self-editing tool. It keeps me from jumping in and just saying something that I think is interesting, but it may not be something that's going to keep the customer engaged about what's important to them. So I use the mute button all the time. Once in a while, I start talking, I realize I'm on mute, and then I say, oh, maybe it wasn't that important. I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to stay on mute until they're actually done. So that's a way to embrace silence. And these are all ways to slow down your brain so that you're not going ahead with your listening ahead of where the customer is. Now, here's the big shift into the topic of the day. You can't listen more and get better at listening unless the customer there's a typo here. Unless the customer talks more. You can't listen better if they're not opening up. So it's like a metal detector, right? You have to find a way to get them to open up. You have to find the gold. Greg said, embrace silence, marvelous. Silence is powerful, especially in sales calls. True. It's very true. It's just hard to do sometimes, right? The customer has to talk more if you're going to listen better. That's why you have to ask truth-seeking questions, or as I call them, disruptive questions, that are questions that speak to the customer's point of view, not yours. They seem to wake up a different part of the customer's brain that gets them to say, oh yeah, well that is important to me, or that is something we have. I'm going to talk about that. And sometimes they'll say, when you ask the question, which is good. It means they're thinking. You want thoughtful answers. So now I'm going to give you, again, I go back and forth between truth-seeking and disruptive. Same thing. I'm going to give you 3 examples of the questions. So this is the inverted trapezoid here. I think it's a trapezoid. It's back to the algebra thing. The reason it's there is because if I'm going to ask a few questions to someone, I'm going to start big picture. As I said, I'm going to get them to engage by asking about the board meeting or the executive leadership meeting. What's the top priority or challenge I'd hear about? So you start big, and then you zero in a little bit on their job responsibility and them, and then about their experience. Then you can get into, you kind of have gotten permission to get experience, information about how they experience your product or the problem that they have. So this works whether you're prospecting, talking to a prospect who's not a customer, or an existing customer, to retain them or just check in, do a quarterly business review, whatever. So I talked a lot about this question. What I'm going to do in a moment is deconstruct it, because I want you to know how it works. Why does it work? Why do people open up when they hear this question? And the reason I'm telling you how to deconstruct it, you may want to create your own disruptive or truth-seeking questions that you think of. I have no monopoly on this. I do have a set of 16, a toolkit of questions that I've developed, but it doesn't mean you can't develop your own. The next question I would ask, depending on how it goes at the top, excuse me, is about their job. Hey, let me ask you this. What's one thing that absolutely has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days for you to be successful? What's the one thing that absolutely has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days for you to be successful? So as you can see, it's not the big picture sort of strategy question. It's more about the realities of their, now you could say 90 days, you could say 6 months, you could say 6 days. It doesn't matter. It really has to do with the cadence of the industry that you're in. How quickly do things happen and need to happen? But what this question is doing is basically saying, what's the delta or difference between what your world looks like today and what it needs to look like in 90 days? How is it going to be different? Maybe their answer will be something you can help with. One great example from my kind of body of work, it came from one of my training clients. She said, well, there are two examples. The one is, let me go to the board question. I'll give you an example of each. Sorry. The board question, one of my students came back and said, that my customer said, oh, the board meeting, they're just focused on this whole acquisition. They're like obsessed with it. You know, it's all they're talking about. And my client said, the account manager said to their customer, oh, really? An acquisition? I'm just curious. What's that about? Can you tell me? What can you share? And it turned into a situation where the acquired company was not a customer of my client. And it was an opportunity to introduce a new use case, which his current client, the acquirer, wasn't using. And it turned into a big opportunity. And that's just one of many examples that I get. People give me, you know, they're nice enough to get back to me and say, here's how it went. The next question, what has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days? An example here would be, well, by the way, it could be the board meeting, or it could be, I have an executive review of my product line and I have to get ready for that. And it's a real headache. Oh, that's understandable that it's a headache, because you want to empathize, right? Even if you can't help them, you don't know if you can help them. Well, what goes into that? Like, what's hard about it? What's the hardest part of this executive review that's coming up? The stats, you know, we just do not have a good way to report updates and, you know, whatever it is, different kinds of statistics to show what we're doing and why we believe we're successful. And if that's your customer, if that's your existing customer, you can say, well, does any of that come from our product? Yeah, as a matter of fact, you know, we do spend an inordinate amount of time trying to pull data from your platform to report up to this, you know, this executive level. Well, would it help if one of our subject matter experts helped you spend 10 minutes with you and we can put something together that automates it? You know, that kind of thing. That's what the story I heard, which is a tremendous value add to an existing customer. When you want to ask finally about you want to get to the topic of you. What do you think of us? This could be more for an existing customer. This one's a real barn burner. So let me ask you this. If you got a call tomorrow from one of our competitors, how would you react on a scale of 1 to 5, where a 1 is you'd pretty much ignore and a 5 is you'd respond pretty quickly to find out what they offer and how much it costs? So this question, it could take your breath away, because you're trained, as we all are, not to bring up competition and not to give the competitors any oxygen. Why would we bring that up, Bob? It's a Pandora's box. What if they start raving about one of our competitors? That's not how it works in real life. That's not what happens. And number one, remember, radically authentic discovery, the authenticity is you're just saying what really happens. Of course they hear from your competitors. That's the most common answer is, well, I got a call from their competitor the other day. So it happens. So you're tapping into something real and authentic that happens in their world every day. And their answers end up having nothing to do with competitors. It has to do with how they feel about the relationship with you. What I mean by that is, let's say they say 5. They'd get back to your competitor. Number 1, do not get defensive. Do not assume. Do not panic. Don't assume anything that has to do with your product. Just simply ask this, the follow-up. I appreciate you being so candid. That's exactly what these conversations should be about. Can you tell me why you said 5? Tell me why you said 5. The most frequent answer I get from customers, my clients' customers, is something like this. It is, I said 5 because we would get back to them. And most of that is not because we're looking around. I think you guys are doing a fine job. But we are craving context and insights about how to do our jobs better. And a lot of times other vendors are out there publishing white papers and webinars and insights and having brown bag sessions that speak to us doing our job better. And so we're not cheating on you by talking to a competitor. We're just trying to learn. The next question then could be, this is so helpful, because you want to reward them for being candid with you. This is so helpful. Can you tell me what's the last thing that you learned, or something that you'd like to learn? Is there a topic? Because we view it as our responsibility to keep you informed on those kinds of things, and so we'd want to know. So you're getting, and what you do with the information is, depending on what your role is. Let's say you're a founder, is the customer says, or the prospect says, reporting or whatever. And then you have a topic or a theme for content marketing that you can now introduce to your marketing team. You have insights for your customer success team, if you have one, or customer support team, or your engineering team. A lot of product innovation ideas and roadmap come from this question, and the top question, actually, the board question. So the 1 to 5, it's really important to ask the questions the way they are and let them land. And what I mean by that is, if you just say, if you got a call from our competitor, what would you do? The 1 to 5 is so important because it gives the customer a buffer to give an easy answer first, 1 to 5. They don't have to launch into a big explanation. Reduce the friction, 1 to 5. And then the 5 allows you to take a breath and say, I'm not going to get defensive. I'm not going to panic because they said 5. It gives you a chance to just say what I told you before. So these are the 3 examples of the toolkit I have of 16 disruptive questions. They go throughout the entire buyer and customer journey or life cycle, so you can use them as you see fit. I want to tell you, this is the deconstruction part. What do these questions have that get people to open up so much? And in my experience, customers talk 75+% of the time in these conversations. So it's not a sales call, it's a discovery conversation. So every question has a hook. Every truth-seeking disruptive question has a hook. An example, a board meeting. It's something, or a whiteboard, or a competitor. It's something they're familiar with. Even if they don't have a whiteboard in their house or their office, it doesn't matter. Everyone understands the context. Everyone understands what a competitor is. It's real stuff that happens in their world. So once the hook is used, their brain wakes up and they go, oh, well, that's me. That's like something, that's not a vendor thing. That's something I know about. Then there's a twist. The twist is something like, if I could sneak into your next board meeting, it's got personality to it. It has the effect of engaging them at a different level. Sometimes they say, if I was a fly on the wall. When I started doing international customer discovery conversations, I realized that fly on the wall doesn't translate very well in other languages and cultures. So I try to stick with, if I could sneak into your next board meeting, like it puts in a scenario in place that they can relate to. The twist in the second question, what has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days? So sometimes I've heard people say, what's on your whiteboard? So there's 2 issues with that. One is that it's not doesn't give them the twist to keep them engaged and give an interesting answer. And I'll tell you the other thing that's wrong with it in a minute. The last one is the hook competitor. The twist is, how would you react if you got a call? Because that happens all the time in their world, right? So there's a hook and a twist. The other thing that I found is really important about these questions is I never ask for lists. I don't say, what is your board discussing? Or what's on your whiteboard? I say, what's the top priority or challenge? What's the one thing that has to be off your whiteboard? And the word absolutely, it's so vivid and urgent that it helps them think about the one thing. The reason that I ask for top priority is I want to start with what's most important to them. And if I ask in too open-ended of a fashion, then they will give me a list. And then I have to go away and guess which one is the most important. By starting with the one big thing, even if it doesn't lead directly to them buying my product, that's okay because it builds engagement and trust. And you might find out that there's a second thing that the board is discussing that leads more closely, aligns more closely with the value proposition that you have. Again, feel free to populate the chat with questions, especially those of you who joined after the start. Would love to hear from you. The other thing is this. We have so effectively trained customers to expect us to talk about ourselves and our product that when you ask a question like the board meeting, sometimes they'll say, well, our board meeting doesn't discuss your product. No, I'm sorry. You have to clarify it. Say, I wasn't asking about anything having to do with us. I'm asking about you because they're so used to us diving in about us. So sometimes you can append the question with, what's the top priority or challenge I'd hear about independent of what we do? Like even independent of your job. It doesn't have to be anything like that. Let's start at the top. And it really helps them understand that you're asking fully about them and their company. Greg, I see you've added a nice meaty chat here. So in those instances, I'm almost encouraged the customer. All right, we'll come back to that if we have time. That looks awesome. Thank you for the compliment too. So I'm going to skip this one and go to the next one, but I want you to hear what it sounds like when you ask that barn burner question. If a competitor contacted you tomorrow, how would you react? And then you're going to hear some follow-up. And I want you to listen because I want you to tell me if you can, simply in the chat, simply put red, yellow, or green for the health score of that customer. It's a very simplistic. Do you hear it as they're red? There's a problem. There's risk. Yellow, we got to keep an eye on it. Green, they're not going anywhere. Okay. So I want you to put R, Y, or G for red, yellow, green in the chat if you can. And I want you to then keep listening, both clips. And if it changes, just put in a new letter. Okay. Here we go. If you got a call or an outreach tomorrow from one of the competitors that you mentioned, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you react? A 1 is you would ignore or delete the message. A 5 is you'd probably get back to them to want to know a little bit more about what that competitor is all about. What number would you give?
Well, I'm very courteous, so I would definitely politely inform whoever reached out to me that I appreciate it. I'm flattered that they're interested in working with me, but I would not entertain any possibility of switching over at this time. So I guess it would be pretty close to the 1 on the scale. I wouldn't ignore them, but I would definitely shoot it down pretty quickly. So yeah, we've got green and green from Christian and Paul. Thank you very much. Sounds about right to me. Sounds kind of green. I didn't hear anything. It's nice and a nice tight answer, right? So I get 2 and 3 minute answers. This wasn't it. So it sounds pretty concise and clear. Now, here's the follow-up I always ask. So got it. Thank you. It's very helpful. Is there something that a competitor might offer or say that would get your attention for sure and cause you to get back to them? Here's how that went. Is there anything that you can think of that might get your attention from a competitor that would? Remember, if you hear your letter change from, if you're green, if it changes to something else, let me know on the chat. You to just say, you know what, we're happy, but I will take a meeting because you never know what you're going to learn, or the door is not completely closed. The fact that it might be half the price, or what I would say is there's been a big emphasis in terms of every dollar counts and really making sure that we're being efficient with our money and not overspending on anything. And so I know for a fact that one of the competitors is cheaper. And I think that if I spoke with our internal finance team and they said, hey, when your contract is coming to an end,
we really need to reduce some of our customer service related expenses, and it's your responsibility to identify ways, for us to reduce costs on that front. Then yeah, I think I would have to give a look, just because, yeah, they are significantly less expensive than, and we did, of course, make the choice to continue our partnership with, despite approaches from, and I was aware of the fact that they were cheaper. But I think that if in the future we significantly had to reduce our customer service expenses, then I would have to give another consideration. And I would like to think that I'd be very transparent with, in terms of our needs to reduce costs, and hopefully they could work with us. But I think definitely cheaper, and I think people in the customer service world are aware of that. So I think that's one of their selling points, is that they are cheaper than some of the other competitors.
I'm gonna pause it there, because that's the gist of it. So yeah, yellow, 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 because the value prop might not be as strong currently. You need to double down on value creation in the eyes of the customer. Awesome, I like that. Yeah, went to yellow. Now, the rest of the clip, I actually gave a prompt after he said that, and I said, well, what if the cheaper company could get that message? Or what if they could get in front of your executives? This person is a VP, right? So he, as you can tell from the first clip, if it was up to him, he wouldn't make any changes. So I said something to the effect of, what if the cheap competitor could get their message across to your executive? He said, well, as a matter of fact, they have tried really hard to get in with me and our CEO. And they were kind of insisting on, kind of pushing their way in to meet through all channels and the board or whatever. And, it didn't really go anywhere, but it shows you the risk. You may have gotten down, you guys, if you had listened to the rest of it, you may get down to red at some point, because he also revealed that he changed who he's reporting to. He was reporting to the CFO and founder. Now he's reporting to the chief growth officer. This was all before the economic downturn. So well before. So you can imagine that his initial answer was not all you need to know. The answer to whether they are staying, it depends it depends who you ask. It may not be up to him. That's why we have to sell to companies, not people, right? So I'm going to skip to the next one. I'm going to leave you with this template, because it's important. The questions are so disruptive that you need to introduce them a little bit. And these templates, one is an email you can send before a meeting with a prospect or customer. You could say, hey, just a quick note about our call coming up. I'd like to have a little bit of a step back conversation. This is just asking some open-ended questions so we can listen and learn about your top level priorities and challenges as a company, et cetera. The more we understand, the better we can deliver the value we think you need from us, and then the same thing, but in a talk track. So you could just say this and you could change it. This is just what has worked really well for me and the folks that I teach. Same language. We're wondering if we can have a little bit of a step back conversation. And that way, when you ask about their board, they won't say, why do you need to know that? Or that's a weird question. You give it a little bit of an intro and it works beautifully. They ease right into it. When you see the recording, you can look at these results. These are anecdotal from teams that I've worked with. The two that are most, I guess, compelling. This one here, I asked what would make you a customer for life, one of my toolkit questions, and it unearthed a misperception with the prospect. And by addressing it, we ended up getting a 3-year deal versus the 1-year proposed deal. And then here, crafted a new strategy using some of my tips to engage an executive audience. It turned a $120,000 renewal into a $70,000 expansion on top of that renewal. So I would love to entertain questions or comments about any of this. You've been very good about engaging and very on point. I think I'll have to anoint you all honorary chief listening officers. But I wanted to see if you have questions. This is obviously, there's a lot more behind this that I could talk about. So if I missed something that you're curious about, please tell me. Or Lisa, if you might have questions as well.
It's absolutely. I think I could listen to you for hours and hours. I'm sure our group feels the same. I mean, there's just so much nuance and psychology to what you're doing. And while some of it may just seem so, well, duh, but it's not. It's not obvious. It takes, like you said before, discipline to orient yourself this way. And the results just seem absolutely incredible. But yeah, I wanted to open up. Here's a question in the chat, a couple of questions. So let's go there before we have to wrap up.
Yes, Greg, absolutely. I think the most effective way to do that is for you to hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the link to the report. Well, I can tell you it's the RAIN group, and you can start with that. But I am, and I can also send it to Lisa, who can distribute to the team, because I don't have access to the whole group.
We're going to circulate both the recording for today. So in case you missed some good stuff, you can go back. Bob, if you're willing to share the presentation, we can do that. And of course, I'll copy you on the email to everyone. So if people want to reach out directly to Bob and get more information on how to engage Bob and ask any additional questions, you'll have Bob's contact information there as well.
Yeah, and here it is as well. Do I have time to answer another question or two?
Yeah, please.
So Matt, this is a good question. So I'm not a technologist, and I'm not a Luddite either. So I was a little bit defensive about AI, the emergence of AI in some of these areas. Oh no, you have to have conversations with people, and you can't do it with surveys, you can't do it with technology. Wrong. So the company I mentioned earlier, Gong, Gong, you know, what's interesting about Gong is that the origin of it, again, they do analytics on recorded sales conversations. It was for coaching sales teams, but it's for sales and customer success, anybody. By recording the conversations and putting them through some machine learning capability, whether it's Gong or something else, it's extraordinarily helpful, both in the insight perspective. Are these conversations, which competitor is coming up when they do talk about competition? If they do, what's the big problem they need solved? And AI is unbelievably useful at taking a first cut at all that. The other thing would be, I would call it the meta perspective, is you want to know how much you talk versus listen, use Gong. Record the conversation, use Gong. You want to know your pause score, PAUSE, use Gong or another platform, because they will tell you the interval between when the customer stopped talking and you started. And if you're jumping in too quickly, then you're not embracing the silence. So AI and Gong is heavily invested in AI to do those things. But there are a million companies that just even the basic Zoom note-taking tool is helpful, because you can zone in on the conversation without having to scribble notes. However many years ago I started doing this work, I was handwriting in notebooks because I didn't want to make sound with the keyboard. And I was also meeting people face to face, which is insane now that I think about it, to have these interviews. So it's all progressed very wonderfully. And the answer is absolutely AI can apply in a number of areas for this. Great question.
That is a great question. Especially now more and more, everybody's trying to figure out how best to utilize it. And that Gong technology sounds incredible.
So let me address something else that, Lisa, you actually said it, and that was the duh factor. So I think the idea that we need to listen more is a duh. No crap, no shit. Excuse my language. The idea that we have to ask questions about the customer, no duh. It's obvious. It's maybe obvious. I think where people have gotten the most value out of what I talk about are the questions themselves. That the questions have so much power and leverage that if you ask the questions you're used to asking, you may not get the results that you want. And obviously some of the listening techniques are important, but also the other thing that I think is not widely adopted behaviorally is spending time to understand the customer's company's priorities and challenges. I know that there is lip service to that. I've seen other methodologies, Sandler, Medic, gap selling, consultative, spin selling. Those are all agenda driven. You're looking for answers to help you advance the conversation towards the sale, not to understand them. I really believe that. And so I would say that there's a distinctiveness to this approach, because you don't want to have these conversations in a sales context, because guess what? The sales conversation is when the customer has their arms folded and they're hanging onto their wallet. They're armed. I say, as opposed to disarmed. This is a conversation to disarm them and take advantage of the fact that they're disarmed to get as much information and insight as you can. So there are some differences, I think, here that are worth paying attention to. So I just wanted to address that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And didn't mean to sort of minimize the impact at all. It's the marriage of all of it that is the winning. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say this. Sure. I've had your comment was spot on. I hear that from time to time. And I've had people come up to me after training sessions or speaking engagements, and they say, in sales especially, because there's so much content for sales and they're jaded. They've heard it all. And they come up to me afterwards and say, you know what the best thing about this was? And I said, what? And they said, it was different. And it wasn't Sandler, for example. So I'm not picking on Sandler. They're obviously very successful. So yeah.
Bob, this has been absolutely, I'd be like, as I mentioned, just fascinated by this whole conversation, and your expertise is so deep and powerful and 100% authentic. So thank you for being here today, folks. We really appreciate you joining. As I mentioned, we will be circulating the recording to listen again. I highly recommend that. I know I'm going to go do that. Stay up to date with all of our events over here at Next. I just put a link in the chat. Next.law is our website address. Follow us on LinkedIn. We do these types of events regularly, not always as fabulous and interesting, but certainly we try for it to be. And Bob, thank you so much again for spending this time with us and lending us your incredible expertise.
Anytime, my pleasure.
I
love talking about this.
Sorry,
and I hope I added value to the group. Thank you so much.
100%.
Thanks, everybody.
No doubt.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.